This is a More Complete Beast podcast where we discover and distill strategies to drive the needle forward on your life. Today, we're sitting down with Collin Dees, and we're talking all things health related. We're talking about food, we're talking about supplements, we're talking about how to minimize the phytoestrogens in the environment so you can actually live to be a masculine man, or you can live to be a healthy woman. Doesn't matter. If you're somebody that's interested in maximizing their health, make sure you sit down and listen to this podcast because you absolutely will learn something. So Collin, the first question that I had is, what made you want to get involved in healthcare?
I'm like 17 years old is kind of, when you start to think about what you're going to do the rest of your life, which is crazy if you think about it.
Oh yeah.
To know what you want to do with the rest of your life when you're still a kid. And to think of where I was at mentally and maturity level at 17 compared to now is like drastically different. So,
and it should
anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it should be. I mean, you should develop over those years.
Yeah. And so, I was back and forth between a few things. At the time, I was like really good at like math and science. So I was like really good into physics and calculus and all that stuff. So I'm thinking like, oh, maybe engineering. But it wasn't interesting to me at all. It was super boring. And then for me, my main thing was health, exercise, nutrition. So like my stepdad was a bodybuilder. And when I was wrestling in high school, he was kind of coaching me on the nutrition side of things. And I started to realize like, wow, nutrition makes such a difference in the way you feel and perform and the way you look. And that was like the first big indicator for me that, I really like nutrition and studying it and experimenting with it. So I knew I wanted to do something in the health space, but I was kind of more interested in like nutrition, dietetics, but I was realizing that those didn't pay very well. And at the time that was kind of like a big factor in my head for whatever reason, as I was thinking about money. I know that it's not everything, but it's, you need to pay the bills. And so
yeah, that's an important thing.
I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll go on to med school and do that route. But I wasn't 100% sold on being a doctor either. So at the time, my brother was dating a PA, and I didn't even know what a PA was, a physician assistant. And so she was telling me all about it. It sounded great. I went to some informational meetings and I was like, oh, okay, cool. This is like, I get the medical side, but I can integrate like my health beliefs and my nutrition, exercise, and that'll all be a part of it. So that's kind of what my original thought process was. Like, I'm going to help people become healthier and, alleviate their sickness. And so that's kind of why I wanted to go into some sort of health route.
So basically you didn't just study it, you kind of lived it because you wrestled at Seton Hill, correct?
Yeah. So, I saw some success in high school with wrestling. And I think, a lot of what I did was differently was I was smart, not only about like smart on the mat, but I was smart and calculated with my recovery and my diet. And I was always like very scientific about it. And I think I excelled where other people, they'd just cut a bunch of weight and do it the wrong way and then eat a bunch of crappy food and feel like crap. I was a lot more methodical about it. And so, yeah, like I said, that's when I started to realize like nutrition's such a big piece.
It's like wrestling, since you bring that up, this is a little bit of an aside, but wrestling like promotes disordered eating so much that it's like insane from very young kids all the way up through the collegiate level. So the fact that you learned that lesson sooner rather than later probably gave you some longevity, and you're probably healthier now than you would have been had you not learned that. Because Zach and I know plenty of college wrestlers that right after college wrestling, and you look like you're still in shape. Like there's a lot of guys after college wrestling that just get fat as hell. They look terrible. It's like, dude, it's that disordered eating. They go from like cutting a ton of weight and making weight and looking and being in shape to the second that they have some reprieve from that super restrictive diet, they just blow up like a blowfish and they just look terrible. And it's just like this perpetual cycle of putting on body fat, losing that same amount of body fat to make weight until finally your activity at the end of college for most people, their activity stops, but their eating is still so disordered, they just get so overweight. You know what I mean? It's a shame how many collegiate athletes that were specifically wrestlers, but I'm sure it can happen with all of them, were in such fantastic shape. But the fact that they didn't have that background in nutrition, several years later, they just look like absolute trash and their health is in the shitter, really. And it's just a shame.
You see it in gymnastics and ballet too,
Yes.
but there's something unique about wrestling because like there's so many wrestlers that don't know, the basics of nutrition. Like, you see people blow up after wrestling, people that were once very lean, very athletic, and they just look terrible, just like you were saying. And I was a victim of it. I did things the right way, but even to an extent, like once you start restricting so much, which I just don't believe in that sort of diet lifestyle, that like restricting carbohydrates, super restricting calories and fasting. For a while, it really screwed with my head. It screwed with my body image, and it screwed with like my satiety and how I was able to. At some point, it took me a while to figure out like when I'm full, when I'm actually hungry, because in the past it was like, oh, if you're hungry, just don't eat, just push through it. And then when you do get to eat, you have to eat a lot more. So that screwed with me for a little while. But yeah, it's terrible for that.
Yeah, it's terrible for sure for the disordered eating. But if there's one thing I know about wrestlers, working with wrestlers, being somebody that was in combat sports myself, is that it facilitates a certain level of, it reveals a certain level of mental toughness that I don't think you get from other sports, because so much of combat sports occur when nobody's watching. So like these guys that are great boxers, yes, they're in the gym and they're training, but a lot of these guys wake up before the sun's out and they'll run 5 or 6 miles. The same thing with wrestlers, or the wrestler that has to make weight, and he could be, eating candy and be like, oh, coach, I missed weight, I was sick, or blah, blah, blah. But it's when nobody's watching. And that's why I think building, if they can transfer that skill, and a lot of them do, but some of them don't, if they can transfer that skill and that grit that allows somebody to be a great wrestler, boxer, combat athlete, they can really kind of do anything. And now that's how I kind of want to transition into, so you had, wrestling success in high school, you wrestled in college, you decided to be a PA, and then you eventually got into the Cleveland Clinic. So tell us about how you made that transition from after you graduated to working in the Cleveland Clinic.
Well, it wasn't my original plan. So and I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. I hope that's okay. During PA school, I started to realize that I wasn't quite buying in. I wasn't, the things I was learning weren't what I thought I was going to be learning. So a lot of what I had seen in class in the didactic period, which is this intense 15-month period where you're in class for 4 to 6 to 8 hours a day, and then you're studying literally the rest of the day, and you're taking several exams a week, really intense. But a lot of it was like memorization, like memorize this drug for this sickness. And just a lot of studying to memorize these things. And to me, there was no talk about lifestyle or diet or exercise. I don't think we touched on nutrition much at all. So for me, I started to realize like, man, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. And even like during PA school, I'd find times where, while I was supposed to be studying, I'd be looking up like, herbal remedies and like lifestyle hacks and biohacks to improve sleep and all these different things that I was interested in and learning kind of on the side. And so then I get to my clinical year where we're doing these rotations through, emergency med and primary care and stuff. And during that, I started to realize that a lot of medicine, like practical clinical medicine, was very much the same of like talking to a patient for a very short period of time, not getting a lot of very in-depth information about what they're eating and how they're sleeping and what their stress looks like, but more so like oh, okay, you're sad, here's a pill, or oh, you have an infection, here's another pill. And so there wasn't much of the lifestyle side of things. And for me, I started to realize, man, this is again doesn't really align with my beliefs. And so as I was going through that, I started looking into other options. And I found that there was alternative medicine, things like functional medicine, integrative medicine, all of these clinics that were doing things either from a preventative cause or finding the root cause and kind of treating that first. And I started applying for those kinds of jobs, but ultimately I just didn't have the experience or the extra certifications because you have to learn all of this stuff on your own. What you learn in PA school is completely different than what you see in like a functional or alternative medicine clinic. So they expect you to be going to clinics and or to conferences and to be shadowing doctors. And I didn't have any of that, so I couldn't get those jobs. So I ended up taking a job in surgery to pay the bills. So I took that job, not exactly what I wanted to do. But I ended up in the Cleveland Clinic, which is, it's a pretty prestigious institution. Worked there in surgery. And, the entire time that I was working in surgery, I was kind of, looking for a way out. So it's not that I hated it. It's just, it wasn't exactly suited to, my beliefs of health and how I wanted to go about things.
That traditional primary care method that you mentioned, where it's you sit in a room, a doctor prescribes you prescription for whatever symptoms you have and puts you out the door with a prescription. Do you think that comes from lack of education? Do you think that comes from lack of purpose? Or do you think there's money attached to that? Where do you think this primary tradition that we see the way that doctors practice comes from?
I think it starts with penicillin, which was like, with the invention of penicillin, it was the first time in history that we were like, wow, you can take a pill and it cures all of these things that we haven't been able to cure. And like infectious disease rates drop and infant mortality rates drop. And so it was like this revolutionary thing of, oh my gosh, we need to start creating more of these pills so that we can, extend people's life and prevent these other conditions, or not prevent, but cure these conditions. And so I think that started the whole like pill centric focus where, the pill is the panacea. You take it and it goes away. And then it's easier to do that than to do the lifestyle change. And then of course, as you're developing these big pharmaceutical or these pharmaceutical drugs, the pharmaceutical companies are profiting. So it's big business. It's really, really big business. And you go into like on my primary care rotations, I remember, being a PA, and every single day for lunch, there was a farm rep, every single day, promoting their drugs. And, they want the doctor to sell a certain amount of certain medications. So yeah, money is a big piece of it. These pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies get big kickbacks and they all work together. Yeah. And I mean, eating a healthy diet is not going to, heal your broken femur or
Right.
your tuberculosis. Of course, we need modern medicine.
For sure.
But it's just that, the system's broken for a reason. And the pills, the excessive amount, the polypharmacy is obviously not curing the obesity problem and the chronic disease problem that we have in this, in the Western world.
So, Collin, when you were at the Cleveland Clinic, you said that you didn't necessarily not enjoy it, but you said the whole time you were looking for a way out. Why were you looking for a way out? You were at the most prestigious institution. People in your position would be ecstatic. They made it to the Cleveland Clinic, but you were looking for a way out. Why was that?
Yeah, it's crazy because and I was even in a cool position. Like I got to see cool surgeries, I got to do cool things, but ultimately for me it came down to the fact that I showed up at the same time every day and I left at the same time every day. And as long as I wasn't, doing something completely terrible and harming the patient, but what I'm saying is like if I showed up and did a mediocre job, or I showed up and I excelled and I tried as hard as I could, there was no difference. There was no recognition of that. There was no bonus structure or promotional kind of thing. It was just clock in, clock out, do your work, you know? And for me, that was just so, it was boring, you know, for lack of a better word. There was no drive in me to become better. There was no drive in me to like progress or build or be creative. And so I just felt like, man, am I going to be doing like this, like just showing up at the same time for the next 30 years, doing the same thing over and over and over? And for me, that was like a nightmare. And so, yeah, I wanted to look for other opportunities that were more, I'm not going to say intellectually challenging, because, you know, surgery still is intellectually challenging. It's just that gave me the opportunity to grow and, you know, in myself, but almost in a more kind of entrepreneurial role, or a role where I had the incentive to be better.
And that's what your current job provides you.
Yeah. So I'm in a kind of a unique position where I'm a PA and I still treat people medically, but I'm also in a practice it's a growing clinic, and I am directly responsible for bringing in more patients and treating these patients the right way so that we get referrals. And I'm a part of marketing and sales and the growth of the business and the development of it. So it's completely different, and it's very motivating to have goals and to hit them and to reach for certain things.
So you explained the difference between the business structure of the Cleveland Clinic versus where you're at now, in terms of being somebody that's just clocking in versus being somebody that's an entrepreneur and helping the business grow. Outside of just the different structure and where you're currently employed, what's the different patient experience between something like the big medical establishment of the Cleveland Clinic versus where you're working at now? And where are you working? What's it called? Where is it located?
I work at it's a clinic called it's the Institute of Vitality. And we're in Tampa, Florida, and this is a clinic that focuses on mainly preventing chronic disease and preventing the effects of aging. So, you know, you could call it anti-aging. I don't love that phrase, but it's more so just health first and optimizing health. So the difference is kind of between what I do and what, you know, a normal primary care practice or a hospital. Everything's normal. It's okay. Well, we'll get you in this kind of reference range of normal. And unless you're outside of this reference range, you're fine. Like, as long as you're not dying, we're not going to treat it. And so, you know, you have people come in that they're fatigued and they have no sex drive and their hair is falling out and they're constipated and they have all these different symptoms. And all that they've ever been told by their doctor is, well, you're in the normal range. You're fine. You know, or they'll say, well, eat less and move more, you know, and it's so surface level when, you know, we look much deeper, you know, into the lifestyle, into these habits, as well as we look at hormones way differently. So hormone replacement therapy is a big piece of what I do. And again, there's such a big difference between normal and optimal. And we just see so much hormonal dysfunction in today's modern world. So that's a big piece of it. And it's much more fulfilling to me because these patients really want to get better. And it kind of hurts for me to say it, but like at the Cleveland Clinic and a lot of these big institutions, you see the sickest of the sick people. I mean, people that have horrible type 2 diabetes and they're getting amputations and they continue to eat terribly and they continue to not exercise. You have people that have, you know, active lung cancer and they continue to smoke and choose these destructive lifestyles. And although I know there's a purpose for physician assistants and doctors and nurse practitioners to treat those kinds of people, for me, it was that environment just really drained me. To be in an environment in a hospital with these sterile white walls and walking around, everybody's sick and everybody's unhealthy, and a lot of your patients just don't want to get better. It's really hard. And a lot of them are stuck in the mindset of a pill or a surgery is the only way. So they don't know any better. It's not really their fault. Whereas my patients now come to me, and a lot of times it's like, hey, the conventional medical model failed me. How can you help me? And I know that these people are super invested in their health. They're going to listen to what I say, and we see results, and it's just so fulfilling.
The difference you would say between the patient experience from where you are now and where you are at in the Cleveland Clinic could be that these patients coming in, they want to do better and they're willing to do it a different way. They're not bought into the conventional medicine way. They're not necessarily looking for a pill. They're willing to put in the time and they're willing to try something different.
Yeah, exactly. And, some of them have a very high health acuity. They come to you and they're already, improving their sleep and taking supplements and their diet's on point, and they have a personal trainer. But we do have people who come in who are just like, hey, I still feel like crap and I've never been told that anything's wrong with me. Can you figure out what's wrong? So it's people that, they're putting their health first and they're investing in their health. And that's a good start. You want patients like that.
I want to start getting into more of the weeds of the health aspect of this. You said that just recently when you were talking about the client experience, you said that there's a lot of hormonal dysfunction occurring right now. Why do you think there's so much hormonal dysfunction occurring right now?
Oh man. Yeah, this is a big one. So we live in an unnatural world in general, right? Like the clothes that we're wearing, the lights that we're surrounded by, we live in boxes, we stare at boxes all day long. We work in a cubicle, right? Like everything is so caged in. It's like if you put a gorilla in an exhibit at a zoo and you look at their health versus the gorilla that's out in nature and living its natural lifestyle, the health is completely different. Like, I was just reading this book recently. I can't even remember what it's called because I read like 10 books at one time. I'm a maniac, but, they were talking about this exact thing where they're seeing coronary artery disease and they're seeing low testosterone in these gorillas that are staying in zoos. They're like, what is going on? And they start feeding them a natural diet again. They start kind of mimicking the lifestyle that they have in nature, and the coronary artery disease goes away and the testosterone comes up. So a lot of it is just the lifestyle we live. You're not supposed to be sitting 8 hours a day, and you're not supposed to be stressed out sitting in traffic. You're supposed to be outside and moving, and you're supposed to be eating foods that you evolved to eat, not these packaged foods and not the food at fast food restaurants that's fried in inflammatory oils. So yeah, that's kind of a piece of it. The grand scheme is that it's an unnatural world, but if you want to get into the nitty gritty, it's our water supply. It's in this country specifically, the chemicals that we allow in our foods here that other countries have banned. And the list is thousands of chemicals. It's our pesticides, it's the things that are in our water. And they're known endocrine disruptors. That's what they call them, EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals. And these have effects on, thyroid, on testosterone, on, a lot of them are estrogen mimicking. So a lot of these plastics, a lot of the chemicals that are in your frying pan, a lot of these things mimic estrogen or mimic other hormones in your body. And so then they're throwing off your complete natural balance. And so we just live in this world where it's very hard to be optimized hormonally. And, I even see guys come in and they're like, I'm sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. I'm taking vitamin D, I'm taking these supplements, I'm working out, and you still see that they have low testosterone. And it just makes you realize, like, man, we're just in this environment that makes it so difficult. So yeah, it's our environment, it's our food, it's everything around us that's affecting us.
So outside of, and you just touched on it, and I think this is 95% of what everybody kind of knows and agrees on. Consistent exercise, get enough sleep, manage stress, eat a minimally processed diet, and supplement where needed. Outside of that, is there anything that, you know, the listener or myself or Zach or Collin or any of us can do to try to minimize that exposure to these environmental estrogens? Whether does organic make a difference? Does, like, my house, I have this underneath my floors, I have like this big reverse osmosis water filter that has like all types of stuff that comes in out of a different spigot, things like that. What are 3 or 4 things that we can do to try to limit the exposure to these chemicals that other countries have already outlawed?
Yeah, what you're doing right there, the reverse osmosis, that's huge. So filter your water is probably one of the biggest ones. Eat organic is another one. And you can even look at something called the Dirty Dozen, which is, I forget if this is the EPA releases it. It's this big report that they release every year, and there's 12 foods on it. And these 12 foods are the most pesticide contaminated foods. So you look at these foods and it might be like apples and eggplants and kale or something, but there's 12 of them. And these foods you absolutely should eat organically or locally because they're just covered in pesticides, even more so than any other, you know, food. I mean, all of our foods, whether it's corn or wheat or soy, are either genetically modified or sprayed in some sort of pesticide. So if you can try to eat those organically or home make them or grow them in your backyard, even better. Those are some big ones. Avoiding non-stick pans. So there's forever chemicals in these flame retardants in the pans. And they're endocrine disruptors, and they call them forever chemicals because they just don't degrade. There's no like decomposition. They just stay around forever. So you imagine once you ingest them, like what's happening, how long are these staying in your body? And then I think sleep is a big part of it. I think we are, as a society, just stressed out in general, like overstressed and overstimulated. And that affects our sleep, and sleep kind of regulates everything. You know, when you are sleeping well, everything tends to get better. And part of that, if you want to talk about practical things you can implement, is I think, you know, everyone should just shut off their phone like an hour before bed. So in general, after the sun goes down, I pretty much limit blue light exposure. So could be from a laptop or my phone. I always have these filters on that change to more red light. I wear blue light blocking glasses at night. But if you can read a book before bed and just stop that constant like stimulation, whether it's Netflix or Twitter or politics or whatever it is, that's going to help your sleep dramatically. So those are kind of some big things. You know, you can get into the more nuanced type of stuff. And you can even get into, like, of course, hormone replacement therapy, which I think should be your last resort. Obviously, you want to fix the lifestyle things first, but there's a reason that the market, you know, I have job security because there's so much hormonal dysfunction that a lot of men do need hormone replacement therapy.
So just to recap that real quick, some things that the listeners can do right now to try to limit themselves to these hormone disrupting chemicals in our environment. The first one, look up the Dirty Dozen, which is usually, I think you said it was published by the EPA, which basically will tell you the 12 foods that have the most pesticides in them, more than usual. You're going to eat these foods, get them organic. Get a reverse osmosis water filter. Avoid non-stick pans. I want to ask something about that specifically because there's forever chemicals in there. And make sure you're getting enough sleep and practice good sleep hygiene when you're doing that. As for the non-stick pans, so one thing that we bought for my house, and I don't know if this is any better, we started getting those green pans. You know anything about that? It's supposed to be like free from the forever chemicals. I don't know how true that is. It says made in China, so I actually don't believe it. But they're supposed to be like free of all these forever chemicals. They were expensive, so I mean, hopefully they do something. You ever hear of those?
I'm guessing they're stainless steel. I haven't heard of those specifically. I mean, I'm aware that there's different brands, and I've kind of heard of the green ones, but I don't know exactly what's in them or what they're made out of. But I know stainless steel is a good option, or probably one of the best options. But yeah, it is a little bit more expensive, and so Every time I'm making these suggestions, I always have to keep in the back of my mind, like the average person, I understand it's hard. You've got a budget and you might have kids and you've got loans and credit, and it's hard to implement. And it's hard for me to sometimes recommend, like, hey, I only eat grass-fed, grass-finished beef. You need to do the same thing. But then I also have to understand the average person can't always afford some of these strategies. So I always try to think in this framework of, what can the everyday average person do? Because not everyone can buy like $1,000 worth of supplements and put a sauna in their house, like an infrared sauna in their house, and stand in front of a red light panel and all of these different like biohacks, I guess you could say. So I always try to frame it in that type of way.
I started carrying my water in a big stainless steel jug, and I'm assuming I always heard either glass or stainless steel is the way to do it. Don't put it in plastic.
Yep.
Okay. What about, so we went over different lifestyle. Are there any, let's say somebody does have a little bit of expendable income and they want to buy some supplements that would help them, I guess, regulate their body and live healthier? Is there 1, 2, 3 things you can think of that don't cost an arm and a leg that somebody can start implementing that would help with their health and their longevity?
So, a nutrient dense diet comes first because,
For sure.
yeah, if you're kind of squared out, yeah, everything's set in terms of vitamins and minerals. At least now okay, well, it's not that, because that's such an easy fix. If you're deficient in zinc and you supplement with zinc, your testosterone's going to come up, your anxiety is going to go down, your hair is going to grow back, you're going to feel better. These are easy things. If you're deficient in vitamin D, such an easy fix. You take vitamin D and you start feeling fantastic again. One thing practically, I guess I could say, most people, probably 80% of people, I mean, I shouldn't just make up a number off the top of my head, but just based on what I've seen, clinically and anecdotally and in the research, probably at least 80% of people are deficient in magnesium. And I think everybody should supplement with magnesium. And I already talked about how there's this chronic stress. Everybody's overstimulated and overstressed. And there's this vicious cycle with magnesium where stress depletes magnesium, and you need magnesium to deal with stress. So as you are depleting magnesium, you're becoming more stressed and your need for magnesium increases, and it's just worsening and worsening over time. And it's kind of crazy, like, especially you can feel it. If you've ever been deficient in magnesium and you take a magnesium supplement, it's almost this instant relaxation. And it could be placebo, but for me, I know every time that I'm super stressed out and I'm like, oh, I haven't taken a magnesium supplement in a while, I take it, I feel just dramatically different. Also, so there's some research on EMFs, and EMFs are I should call them non-native EMFs, because EMFs are electromagnetic frequencies, radiation. But this can come from the earth and it can come from lightning and different things. But the non-native EMFs are things like the signals, radio signals and Wi-Fi signals, and the signal from our phone. And these non-native EMFs actually affect voltage-gated calcium channels. And so one way to stop that effect is with calcium channel blockers. And these are actually used as an antihypertensive drug. But the problem is, you don't want to take these if you don't have, a serious problem, because there's nasty side effects. So magnesium is actually a natural calcium channel blocker. So I think most people just need magnesium. Like I said, I think almost everybody should take a vitamin D supplement if they're not, if you're not getting a lot of sun daily, you should probably be taking a vitamin D supplement. Almost everybody, especially if you live in a northern latitude. The benefits of it are endless. And so usually I recommend to take vitamin D3 paired with K2, because basically the K2 makes sure that the vitamin D isn't deposited in your soft tissues. So it makes sure that rather than the calcium being deposited in your arteries and other soft tissues, it's going to be deposited in your bones where you actually want it, the calcium. So vitamin D is another good one. Like I said, zinc, especially, if you're a man, these three are really important, for men's health. But, yeah, trying to get as much as you can from your diet. I recommend a little bit of liver. Liver is so nutrient dense that, I include it in my diet, grass-fed beef liver. It's kind of like nature's multivitamin. Same thing with eggs, and same thing with oysters. I think if you're consuming these three things pretty regularly, you won't have many nutrient deficiencies. There's still some things lacking there, but focusing on a nutrient dense diet first, and then I guess I went off there. What was the original question? Like, I think I was talking about nutrients, but what was the original question?
Yeah, we were talking about, so if someone had a little bit of expendable income and they were looking to invest into a few supplements, what recommendations you had? And you mentioned that obviously first optimize diet. Get as much as you can from a whole foods diet and nutrient dense foods. And then you were looking at vitamin D, pairing that with K2 so that it gets deposited not in soft tissue, but in your bones where it needs to be. You mentioned zinc, liver. You also touched on a few things like good eggs, but you also touched on magnesium as well. And I was interested if you had a preference in what type of magnesium, or because I know that there's sprays, I know that there's citrate, glycinate, multiple different types of ways to get magnesium. If you had a preference.
Yeah, I mean, what I tell people is just don't take magnesium oxide, because that's like the least bioavailable form. And a lot of times if you just go to, and it's cheap too. So, if you go to like CVS or Walmart and you just pick up a random magnesium supplement, a lot of times it's going to be oxide. And yeah, you're not going to absorb that at all. So, a lot of times a chelated version is better. Something like magnesium glycinate. I like glycinate because I like glycine. That amino acid is probably, it's one of my favorite amino acids. It's super beneficial. Taurate, L-threonate is a really good one. I know Andrew Huberman really likes that one because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. But generally, if it ends in 8, it's pretty good. Magnesium citrate, you just have to be careful because in higher doses, it can have laxative effects. So you want to, kind of spread your dosage out or not take a lot all at once. But it's best if you take magnesium before bed because, like I said, it has that calming effect, and it's really going to help your sleep.
What about dosage? I know that sometimes people don't really like to put a number to things, but do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should aim for 400 milligrams a day. But if you feel like you're in stressed times or you are becoming deficient because you are kind of stressed out or you're not eating a super healthy diet, right? Like our soil levels are depleted of a lot of these nutrients. So as high as 800 milligrams a day is also great. So somewhere between, 400 and 800 milligrams a day, I think is good for most people.
Awesome. So when we're looking at magnesium, normally anything that ends in 8 is a pretty good thing to go for. Stay away from oxide because our body's not going to absorb it. Watch out for citrate because could have a little bit of trouble on the laxative side of things if we get too much citrate. And 400 to anything as high as 800 milligrams is going to be a decent place to be whenever we're talking about dosage and magnesium.
Let's segue into, because I know you've written several ebooks, and Zach and I both read one of them. And I want to get into some of the stuff you're doing outside of your job, some of the stuff you're doing on your own, like where we can find you, things like that. But first, I want to talk about specifically your ebook, Health Myths Busted. So there were 7 chapters in them. A couple of them really stood out to me. The first one had to do with cholesterol. Okay, so I'll just give a quick background. We talked a little bit about this off camera. In terms of my blood lipids, there was a time where my total cholesterol was up to 300. So my LDL was like 120 something. My HDL was extremely high. And it was actually higher than my triglycerides. I did a lot of dietary manipulation. I basically did that when I was extremely lean. We're talking like single digit body fat. I maintained that for a summer, more of a ketogenic diet. As soon as I started adding fiber back in, I literally cut my LDL in half. Now, was I significantly healthier when I had that lower cholesterol than when I didn't, even though I was a little fatter when I was doing the higher carb diet than when I was extremely lean. See what I'm saying? Like, I guess my question is, am I, when I was eating more of a fat-based, higher cholesterol, low fiber diet and I was extremely lean, was I putting myself at undue risk versus when I was eating a higher fiber, lower fat diet?
Yeah. So, I mean, you definitely just kind of, knowing you, I know that you live a pretty healthy lifestyle. It's hard to say that you were at an increased risk. I definitely don't think you were. And kind of one thing that I probably talked about a lot in that chapter is that cholesterol is dependent on the situation and the context. So, in someone like you were lean, you were exercising, you weren't eating processed foods, you were in a healthy, overall a good basis for health. Also, you'd have to look at the other blood work. So like you said, your triglycerides are low and your HDL is higher than your triglycerides. Just right there tells me that metabolically you're very healthy. So that means you're not insulin resistant. You don't have a high fasting insulin. You don't have a high A1C. And we know that with, insulin resistance and high A1C and high fasting insulin, this glycation, the hyperglycemia, this is an insult, to the vessels, the arteries. And so, LDL, the quote unquote bad cholesterol, it only becomes bad in certain contexts. So it needs to be oxidized. It needs to have some sort of factor that makes it bad. And so, your body needs cholesterol. Your brain's made of cholesterol. Your cells are made of cholesterol. Your hormones are made from cholesterol. And I guess more importantly, actually, what we're talking about is lipoproteins, which are just carriers of fatty acids,
Right.
to and from the liver, from your bloodstream to your liver and vice versa. And so, you get a lot of these myths out there that, eating eggs that are high in cholesterol will raise your blood levels of cholesterol, which just isn't true. And that's kind of been debunked. So yeah, unless you were very unhealthy and you're insulin resistant, you're overweight and you're inflamed, which we can also look at markers like CRP, C-reactive protein, homocysteine. These are going to tell us, do you have a lot of systemic stress going on that's going to oxidize your LDL? Because we know that oxidized LDL is the particle that really matters. And then, you've got to think about the size and the density of the LDL particle. Are they small and dense? Are they large and fluffy? So it's really hard to get a full picture just by looking at total cholesterol, LDL, and HDL, which is what 95% of primary care doctors and even probably most cardiologists are looking at. They're not digging into, some of the more extensive testing such as ApoB and lipoprotein A and oxidized LDL. And if you even want to take it a step further, you could have looked at things like, a coronary artery calcium scan, which is going to directly visualize the arteries in your brain, in your neck, in your chest, and tell you, is there any sort of calcium, meaning, plaque in those arteries? And so it's so silly to me that, a doctor will see an LDL and they put a certain number on it. If it's over 100 or it's over 130, you need to be on a statin. And it's like, in your case, that would have been such a ridiculous thing to recommend, but it happens all the time. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is you have to think about the context. Are they eating low carb or, ketogenic diet, which you're going to be using fats for fuel. So more of your fats are going to show up in your bloodstream. Is your thyroid affected? A lot of times in a hypothyroid scenario, you see higher cholesterol. And so, yeah, there's just so many situations that can throw that off, but it's such a simplistic kind of archaic thinking to say that, a high LDL is the end of the world.
That reminds me of a book that I just finished several books ago. It's called The Carnivore Code. And basically what the author was Paul Saladino. That's who it was, Dr. Paul Saladino. He's basically saying that high LDL doesn't matter if you are metabolically healthy and not inflamed. So like at the same time, because I stay on top of my blood work, I'm just weird like that. My HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, was like, it had like a little less than sign, zero point 0.3. So it was actually like it wasn't there. Now I don't know if that's good either, but I know that I wasn't inflamed. And I know I was metabolically healthy. I think my fasted blood glucose was like 68 or something like that. So it wasn't like I had any metabolic dysfunction. And according to him, and it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you're saying is kind of coinciding with what Dr. Paul Saladino said, is that high LDL in the absence of metabolic dysfunction is just a reflection of your dietary habits.
Yeah, and it's backed up by research too. Like there's been population studies where they show kind of this, like, it's like a U curve, and the people at one end of the curve, they have the lowest cholesterol. So maybe they're on statins, or they eat a certain type of diet where their cholesterol is really, really low. And those people don't live as long as the people who are kind of in this optimal cholesterol range, which in the studies, it's actually much higher than you'd think, like 250, 260, 230, somewhere in that range. And then, of course, as you get really high, 300, 350, 400, then, of course, you're going to see some effects, because those people probably have something further going on. But it does appear to be beneficial. Cholesterol has a purpose. It's not just floating around, waiting to clog your arteries and kill you and give you a heart attack.
What about one thing that a lot of people, I think, wrongly associate with deleterious effects on the health, especially like athletes, has to do with salt. So I know you touch on this in chapter 5 about people believe salt is creating like kidney damage and high blood pressure and all of that, like deleterious effects on health. Another little side bar to me, my family, and one member of my family, Zach, there's a bunch of us doing 75 hard. It's basically this program that's absolutely insane. Almost done with it though. I think I'm on day 72. But my mom was doing it, and she was drinking a gallon of water every single day. And she's like, I almost can't do my workouts because of how bad my legs are cramping. And, she started remineralizing her water, and there's a little bit of sodium in there. And I was like, well, just start salting your food to taste, because I know that that's an important part of actually having your muscles fire correctly, is having the appropriate substrates to do that, salt being one of them, especially if you're active. And all of a sudden, her leg cramps start to go way down. So what I kind of want to touch on is, when is salt bad versus when is salt good?
So I would say salt is bad when it's coming from a lot of processed foods. And the reason I say that is because, I'm looking at the research. So some of the stuff that I quoted in that chapter is like, they're comparing and they're saying, oh, a high salt diet is bad, but then, what else is in that food? Is there a good ratio of protein and carbs and fats? Is it all fat? Is it high in processed carbohydrate? Like, what exactly is this high salt? Or are you isolating for just the variable of salt?
Right.
And the study that, when they did look at that, it was the DASH diet. It was the DASH diet trial, I think, where, they separated these different groups, and it was like low salt, high salt, medium amount of salt. And the differences in blood pressure were negligible. It was like single digit differences. And most of the difference was because the people eating the DASH diet, this lower salt diet, was like whole foods, like they were eating real food, versus the other group was just eating whatever they wanted, which tended to be not the healthiest foods. So, I'm not telling, the person that's eating out at buffets and eating McDonald's and French fries and potato chips throughout the day, I'm not saying, salt your bag of potato chips. Absolutely not. But I'm saying, like, if you're eating mostly whole foods and you're eating a healthy diet and you're active, then salt is only going to benefit you. It's been wrongly demonized. And that's one example you said, like, that makes me laugh, where people are like, oh, you need to drink a gallon of water every day. And to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Anytime I've done that, every time I've done that, I'm just like peeing all day long, just clear water. And I'm like, so is this water actually going into my cells? Am I absorbing this, or am I just peeing it all out? So, you need magnesium and potassium, and you need some of these electrolytes to kind of hold on to those things. So it's really good that she was remineralizing.
Yeah.
It seems like a parallel could be drawn towards from the story that you just said about the example you just gave about like you don't want to salt your bag of potato chips. I'm not saying that's what you should do. Weirdly, I find a parallel in that to the chapter that I found interesting is when you talk about omega-3s, and the myth surrounding that supplement was that it's not necessary, that a lot of people think that you need to take an omega-3 supplement. Me being one of them, I take a cod liver oil supplement every day. Just because I believe cod liver oil is a little bit more dense when compared to omega-3s. But from what I took away from that chapter, from what you wrote, was that if you're eating a normal nutrient-dense diet that has fatty fish, it has good fats, it already has natural omega-3s surrounding it, then you don't need to take an omega-3 supplement because your ratio to omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids would already be equal enough for you not to have to supplement. Am I on the right track with what you'd written there? And can you touch a little bit more on that chapter?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most controversial things I say. People hate when I say this. And, I don't think you're wrong for taking, cod liver oil. I think it's a great supplement. It has a lot of benefits. Personally, I don't take it. I don't take, omega-3 supplement or a fish oil supplement. So there's a few things there. Yeah, you touched on this kind of omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, or vice versa, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which like in modern day humans right now, it's like 15 or 20 to 1. Ancestrally, it's been like 4 to 1 or 1 to 1. So we're getting way more omega-6 than we should be. The main place where that's coming from, and this might be a topic that we touch on for another time, is kind of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, these processed seed oils that are kind of in everything nowadays. And so, of course, yes, we see these benefits in studies where they give them omega-3. And yeah, you're going to get benefit when you bring that ratio back to where it's supposed to be. So adding in the omega-3, I think, can be beneficial in those scenarios. But like for, super healthy person who's already kind of, their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is, it's already okay. You probably don't need to supplement as much as you think, or you just need to eat fish a few times a week, or, include some of these seafoods that have omega-3s naturally in them, because a lot of times the supplements, and I'm sure you're very cautious about the supplements you take, but a lot of these supplements are kind of trash. They're oxidized or they're rancid, and these oils are going bad, and then you're ingesting them and you're not getting quite what you thought you were getting. So I'm pretty cautious when it comes to adding any sort of polyunsaturated oil or fatty acid to my diet. That's something I'm a little more polarizing on, or maybe I'm even a little bit biased on. But yeah, that's I think in general the big picture is that we eat a diet right now. Not us three, but we Americans eat way too much omega-6 in our diet. And that's completely throwing off the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It's not the fact that we're necessarily getting too little of omega-3. It's the fact that we're getting this excessive, ridiculous amount of omega-6 in our diet.
Do you think that there's any benefit? So let's say if I'm working with a client who eats a highly processed diet and they eat all that garbage, their ratios through the roof when it comes to omega-6 to omega-3, would it be any benefit to them to take an omega-3 supplement? I mean, sure, it would be better if they could just decrease their consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids, but would there be any benefit to them with taking an omega-3 supplement to sort of balance out that ratio?
Oh, man, that's such a good question. And I think I'll take the safe answer here. I'll say either I don't know or it depends, which is like, it's like the safe answer that it depends, it depends. It's like the safest answer you could possibly give. But there's just not a lot of data on that. And some of the data come out is showing us that you can get some of these bad effects like atrial fibrillation or increased risks of bleeding and certain things that in a population that's not super healthy, you kind of want to be cautious of adding supplements that might not have super dense long-term results on. Because, there's some studies that have come out and said, well, if they have, coronary artery disease or they have AFib, just completely avoid it. So, it depends in certain populations. Man, it's hard to say. I would say, like, if it's something like they want to lower their inflammation, if they have like joint pain, I know that some people do experience a benefit from fish oil in terms of like cognitive function and joint pain and maybe skin health, things like that. But to say that it could like drastically lower their risk of cardiovascular disease, that's a pretty big statement. And not one that I'd be comfortable with, making or saying that,
For sure. So I think you've done a great job answering a lot of questions. You've painted yourself as an expert in this field. I know for me, one of the things, I started this a few times, wrote a couple notes on it, is I got to kind of look at my magnesium intake. So I take a triple calm magnesium at the end of the night. There's 125 milligrams in it, and it sounds like I should probably be taking a little bit more than that. So I'm definitely going to experiment with my dose. I'll try to take a little bit more tonight, see how I feel, see if I have a laxative effect. If I do, that's probably where I'm going to stop, but I'll slowly creep it up until I find like that threshold where I'm getting the maximum benefit with the minimum amount of a fleet enema the next morning. Outside of just us asking the tactics of getting healthier, tell us a little bit about what you're doing outside of your job down in Florida. I know you're writing some ebooks. I know you're trying to build an online presence and you have a nice presence on Twitter. Tell us about what does that look like and what are you trying to do with it?
It kind of just started with, there was no real goal in mind. It was just kind of like a journal. My Twitter was just kind of like, I'm going to put my thoughts out there. And eventually some things started gaining traction. I had people, coming into my DMs and asking for advice and, hey, why don't you write about this? Or I have, and so it turned into me writing a lot of like threads on certain topics. And I really started picking up some steam and momentum and thought like, man, I can kind of create something out of this. And I don't know exactly what direction I want to go, but I know that I do get a lot of people contacting me, for advice. And so, yeah, on the side, I do some consultations here and there. I'll do some kind of blood work analysis for people. I've thought about starting like a coaching program, whether, it's going to be 12 weeks or kind of design it to be, specific to the person and their goals. So yeah, I love the gig I'm in currently. I love my job that I'm in currently because I have a lot of flexibility. But ultimately I just have this desire to just be on my own and working for myself and being my own boss. And so I think eventually I can get to that point. If I grow, organically enough and grow enough my presence, then I can start, whether it's selling a coaching service, selling more ebooks, so info products, putting out a newsletter. Ultimately, it comes down to I'm just got to provide as much value as possible. I just want to help people become healthier. And then any sort of, I guess, financial part of it would just be a byproduct. So I'm really in it for the long term. I'm not trying to make a quick buck because, there's a lot of guys, like especially on Twitter right now, and you'll see, and it's like they're all like copying off of this template or something, or they're copying each other because it's like, do these 8 things to improve your testosterone. And then, at the end of the thread, it's like, book a call with me and I'll help you lose 10 pounds in 10 days or something like that. And it's just, I know that I could make money easily, but I want to remain, genuine and true to myself and not be in it for the money and focus on that. But I have a lot of ideas in mind. I have some ideas for some physical products. So whether that's like a protein powder, like kind of like an animal-based protein powder, or some supplements in mind. I don't have an exact direction, but I think it'll figure itself out over time. And right now, as long as I just focus on putting out content.
Yeah, you're thinking long-term, you're thinking about building a brand instead of just making quick cash. So I think in the long term, you're going to be successful in that. We actually did a podcast. I don't know if you listened to it, but you got to listen to the one with Nathaniel Morton. I think like he kind of created this online business. And I think that like I'm thinking about some of the products you already offer and how you can leverage that to continue to grow your online presence. So I don't know if you listened to that one, but Nathaniel Morton's podcast that we did with him would definitely help you out. That one was excellent for building an online business. But you do have information products out right now. What's your Twitter handle? How can we get our hands on this information product? Do you have a website? How do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, I the best place to start is probably Twitter. That's where I put kind of most of my information. I just started putting out some short form content on TikTok and Instagram as well. So I'm going to be doing that pretty consistently, I think, for the next couple months at least to see what can happen from that. But yeah, mostly on Twitter. So on there, I'm at Collin of One. So like N of One, but my name. So Collin of One. My like username is bioenergetic bro. And that's just kind of like bioenergetics is like kind of a health approach, dietary approach. And I have 2 ebooks that I released. One's called the Macronutrient Manifesto, and that's just kind of like how to eat, why to eat these things. And then the other one is debunking health. So debunking a lot of these myths that you've heard around saturated fat and salt and sugar and different things. So that's another one. So those 2 ebooks. And then I've got 2 more that I'm, the content is all there. I'm just editing them and waiting to release. And then, my Instagram and TikTok are basically the same name at Collin of One.
Awesome. Collin, before we get rid of you here, is there anything else that you want to share? Something maybe that we didn't touch on, or any piece of information, advice that you would just want people listening to this to have a chance to hear?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just don't give up on. I'm trying not to sound cliche. I'm trying to like really to sound genuine. Like, don't give up on the thing that one thing that you can talk about for 30 minutes nonstop. That one thing that people come to you for advice on. Like, don't give up on it. Like, what you're interested in. And maybe you're in a job right now and, you have this 9 to 5 and it pays the bills, but, it doesn't spring you out of bed in the morning. But on the side, you're doing this research and you're trying to better yourself in this one area that you're really interested in. Just don't give up on it, because you never know what could happen if you keep improving in those areas and you're making connections. And eventually you might find some sort of opportunity where, whether it's online on your own, or you find another job that puts you in a position to be kind of, in a more, a position that you're more suited for your passions. So just keep going after it is kind of what I can offer to people.
It's where what you like, what you're good at, and what makes money, where those intersect. That's
Ikigai, right?
Yeah,
that's like a Japanese principle.
Exactly. They have more circles, but that's basically what it's predicated on, the Ikigai principle. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a main theme of our podcast, man. I'm glad you ended the interview like that. Other than that, I think that's it, right? Let's wrap it up. Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Collin. 1, 2,
Appreciate it.
Cool. Well, hey.
Was I supposed to clap there?
Remember, guys, this is a More Complete Beast podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, leave us a 5-star review and share this podcast. The only reason this podcast is growing is because of listeners like you. You leave reviews and you share it. We appreciate that. Continue to do that, and we will see you in the next episode.